Harrison Ford isn't just another Hollywood actor. He's the guy who literally carried galaxies on his shoulders as Han Solo and redefined adventure itself as Indiana Jones. For decades, his face has been stamped into cinema's DNA. That crooked grin, the gravelly voice, the eyes that could flip from charm to steel in half a second. They didn't just play characters, they became symbols of courage, rebellion, and survival. But here's the thing about legends. Behind the spotlight, there's always a shadow. And Ford's real story, it isn't just about box office billions or action hero stunts. It's about broken marriages that left scars deeper than any whip crack, watching his daughter suffer through a cruel illness, and surviving crashes, both in the air and in life, that should have ended everything. At 83 years old, the question isn't how Harrison Ford became a legend. The question is, what pain still haunts him now, in the final chapter of his life? Before we begin this journey through the life of Harrison Ford, I'd be grateful if you tapped the like button and subscribed, only if you feel at home here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. It's always a joy seeing how many corners of the world we're all connected from.
Long before Harrison Ford was dodging boulders or firing blasters at stormtroopers, he was just a painfully shy kid growing up in Chicago. Born July 13, 1942, into a house that practically breathed art. His dad had been an occasional actor, his mom once sang on the radio. You'd think he was destined to steal the spotlight, but nope. The young Harrison felt like the world's quietest ghost. By his own admission, he didn't fit in anywhere. Other kids were out forming friendships, running wild on playgrounds, and there he was, the kid on the sidelines, watching life happen but never quite stepping into it. That silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Imagine being trapped inside an invisible box while everyone else had the key. And it didn't get easier. With a Jewish mother and an Irish Catholic father, Ford grew up straddling two identities that made him feel like he didn't fully belong to either side. Restlessness became his constant shadow. But there was one escape: nature. At 13, as a Boy Scout, Harrison found freedom in the woods, in the sound of the wind through the trees, in the stillness of lakes and under skies that seemed endless. For the first time, he felt small in a good way, like the world was wide enough to hold him. That spark of adventure would eventually morph into his obsession with flying planes decades later. Back in the classroom, though, the prison bars slammed shut again. He was still the shy kid, still invisible, and teachers weren't exactly writing glowing reports. By the time he landed in college in the early 60s, studying philosophy at Ripon College in Wisconsin, he was a drowning man. His grades were awful, his confidence was worse, and he admitted later, "I wasn't a good student. I didn't feel like I belonged." But here's the twist. Out of sheer desperation, Harrison signed up for a drama class. Not because he had some burning dream to act, but because he needed an easy credit. And that accident turned into destiny. Standing on stage, shaking like crazy, he discovered something shocking. The shy kid finally had a voice. For the first time in his life, Harrison Ford was seen. That moment cracked open the cage he'd lived in for 2 decades. And though he had no idea yet, the scars of that silence would fuel every role he'd ever play. The kid who grew up invisible was about to spend the rest of his life commanding the world's attention. But breaking free from childhood shadows was just the first step. Hollywood had a whole different kind of silence waiting for him, and this one was much crueler.
By 1964, Harrison Ford was 22 years old and ready to chase a dream. He packed up, drove to Los Angeles, and carried nothing but an old car, a fragile hope, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, Hollywood would notice him. And for a second, it looked like it did. Columbia Pictures handed him a contract for $150 a week. To a broke kid from Chicago, that number looked golden. But reality? Brutal. His roles were blink-and-you-miss-it cameos, nameless faces erased from the screen before the credits even rolled. The big studio dream turned out to be smoke. Auditions were even worse. Harrison later admitted that casting directors didn't even let him finish a sentence. He'd walk into the room, they'd take one look, and boom, decision made. Rejected before he even opened his mouth. Imagine the humiliation. Showing up with all your hope and walking out already defeated. Hollywood doesn't just ignore you, it erases you. Meanwhile, life outside the studio kept moving. He married his college sweetheart, Mary Marquardt, and before long, they had 2 children. Being a father filled him with love, but it also shoved a weight onto his shoulders he wasn't ready for. Because love doesn't pay rent, and diapers aren't free. So Ford did the one thing he swore he wouldn't do. He pushed acting to the side and turned to carpentry. He taught himself how to build furniture, cut wood, sand cabinets, anything to keep food on the table. He later admitted, bitterly, carpentry paid the bills, but it broke the spirit. Every chair he built felt like a funeral for the dream that brought him to Hollywood. And while he was hammering away in the workshop, his peers were hammering out careers. By the early 70s, Harrison was in his 30s, stuck in a cruel cycle. Auditions in the day, rejection at night, and long hours in the workshop, wondering how to explain to his kids why his dad wasn't making it. He confessed later, "I felt like a failure, like I had no business being an actor." But here's the thing about Harrison Ford. Even when life tried to bury him under sawdust and disappointment, that tiny fire inside refused to go out. He was a ghost in Hollywood, yes, but he hadn't vanished completely. And fate was about to hand him a second chance in the most unexpected way possible.
By the early 70s, Harrison Ford was teetering on the edge of giving up. He was in his 30s, a father of 2, broke most of the time, and building cabinets for people who were actually making it in Hollywood. Every swing of the hammer felt like a reminder that the dream was slipping away. Then 1973 rolled around. George Lucas, a young director no one had really heard of yet, cast Ford in a small part in American Graffiti. It wasn't much, a supporting role, barely enough to pay the bills, but it cracked the door open just enough for Harrison to glimpse what might still be possible. But destiny doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it barges in when you're holding a hammer. A few years later, Ford was doing carpentry work when Lucas asked him to read lines for some space movie script. It wasn't even supposed to be an audition. He was basically there to help other actors run their parts. But something about Ford's dry humor, that natural smirk, that unbothered swagger, it clicked. And just like that, the carpenter walked out of that room as Han Solo. In 1977, Star Wars hit theaters, and overnight, Harrison Ford wasn't the Invisible Man anymore. He was the scruffy-looking smuggler who stole the show. Fans didn't just like Han Solo, they worshipped him. Ford's roguish grin and sarcastic one-liners became the heartbeat of the rebellion. And lightning didn't just strike once. In 1981, Lucas and Spielberg handed him the fedora and whip in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Suddenly, Ford wasn't just part of movie history, he was movie history. Indiana Jones wasn't a character, he was a cultural earthquake. Generations grew up measuring adventure itself by that tilted hat and that fearless grin. In the span of just a few years, Harrison Ford went from sanding cabinets to carrying entire franchises on his shoulders. But here's the cruel irony. The very roles that saved him also chained him. Han and Indy made him untouchable, but they also trapped him in the shadow of characters so big he could never walk away. And that's when the real tension began, because Harrison Ford wasn't content being just a franchise mascot. He wanted to prove he was more than blasters and bullwhips, and the world was about to see just how far he could push.
After Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford could have coasted for the rest of his career just playing the same rugged hero on repeat, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to prove he wasn't just a fedora, a blaster, and a smirk. And so through the 80s and 90s, Ford built one of the most impressive resumes in Hollywood history. In 1982, he stepped into Blade Runner,
a movie that tanked at the box office at first, but later became a sci-fi masterpiece. As Rick Deckard, he wasn't cracking one-liners. He was questioning what it even means to be human. 3 years later, in Witness, he went quiet and intense, playing a cop hiding out in Amish country, a role that earned him his only Academy Award nomination. And he didn't stop there. In The Fugitive, 1993, he turned desperation into pure fire, sprinting through tunnels and off waterfalls in one of the most iconic chase films ever made. Then came Air Force One, 1997, where he played the U.S. president punching terrorists in the face while growling, "Get off my plane." At that point, Harrison Ford wasn't just an actor. He was practically America's collective father figure. The paychecks exploded right along with the box office, from scraping by on $10,000 for the first Star Wars to pocketing $65 million for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. His career earnings skyrocketed. By the late 1990s, Ford's films had raked in over $9 billion worldwide, making him one of the richest and most bankable stars in history. But here's the catch. Fame is never free. To the world, Harrison Ford was invincible. Han, Indy, the president, always outrunning death, always the hero. But when the camera stopped rolling, he was still just a man. And the very spotlight that made him untouchable also stole something from him: his peace, his privacy, and eventually, his family. Because while the world was cheering his box office dominance, his personal life was crumbling behind closed doors. And what fame gave him in glory, it took back in heartbreak.
For all the box office billions and fan adoration, Harrison Ford's personal life was anything but picture perfect. His first marriage, to Mary Marquardt in 1964, was built on struggle. She was with him when he was nobody, cooking meals, raising their 2 sons, and holding the house together while Harrison bounced between auditions and carpentry jobs. Mary carried him through the years of rejection. But when Star Wars exploded in 1977, everything changed. Overnight, the man who was once invisible became a global icon. To millions, he was Han Solo, the rebel hero. To Mary, he was suddenly a stranger the entire world demanded a piece of. Fame, unlike failure, isn't something you can hide from, and Mary found herself sharing her husband with the world and losing him in the process. By 1979, the marriage collapsed. 15 years of devotion ended not in fireworks, but in silence. Their sons, Ben and Willard, saw their family break apart under the blinding glare of fame. For Mary, it was heartbreak without applause, grief written in the shadows while the world cheered her husband's rise. And the rumors didn't help. Whispers of a fling with co-star Carrie Fisher spread across Hollywood. Whether it was gossip or truth, it was another crack in the fragile glass of their marriage. Ford never spoke much about Mary afterward, but maybe that's because every memory reminded him of what fame had cost him. His second marriage to Melissa Matheson in 1983 looked like a second chance. Melissa was brilliant, creative, and strong, the writer behind E.T. and other classics. Together they had 2 kids, Malcolm and Georgia. For a while, their home was full of life and hope. But life had a cruel twist waiting. Their daughter Georgia was diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition no amount of money or fame could protect her from. Ford, who had spent decades portraying indestructible heroes, suddenly found himself powerless. Out of desperation, he even auctioned off his iconic Han Solo jacket to raise money for epilepsy research. To the world, it looked generous. To Harrison, it was closer to begging. But the weight of illness combined with Ford's relentless work schedule and absence slowly fractured the marriage. By 2004, after more than 20 years, it ended in divorce, with Melissa walking away with an $85 million settlement. And just when Ford thought he could leave the heartbreak in the past, fate hit him again. In 2015, Melissa was diagnosed with cancer. Within months, she was gone at just 65 years old.
In 1976, on the set of a strange little space opera no one expected to succeed, Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher slipped into a secret orbit of their own. He was 34, married with kids, already feeling the weight of adult responsibility. She was just 19, sharp, funny, brilliant, but heartbreakingly vulnerable. On screen, they were Han and Leia, bickering their way into cinematic history. Off-screen, fiction bled into reality. For 3 months, the chemistry that millions of fans would later worship wasn't entirely an act. Carrie later admitted in her memoir that she was completely intoxicated by him. His steadiness, his mystery, the fact that he seemed untouchable. For Harrison, Carrie was something else entirely. Escape. A spark of laughter in the middle of suffocating responsibility. A brief reprieve from a failing marriage. But even in the moment, both of them knew it couldn't last. Carrie wrote later, "It was intoxicating, but it could never last." And it didn't. The affair burned hot for 3 months and then ended as quickly as it began. Ford returned to his life. Carrie drifted back into hers. They never spoke of it publicly, and the world had no clue, not for 40 years. Then, in 2016, Carrie Fisher finally revealed the secret in her memoir, The Princess Diarist. She didn't write with bitterness, just honesty. For her, it was a memory that never really let go. Ford, true to form, said almost nothing. His silence was its own confession. But fate wasn't done twisting the knife. Just months later, Carrie died suddenly at age 60. For millions, it was the loss of Princess Leia, the rebel who taught generations how to fight. For Ford, it was something far heavier. He lost the one woman who had once seen him not as a legend, not as a myth, but simply as a man. The affair was never about scandal. It was about tenderness, fragility, and the ache of something that burned brightly but couldn't survive daylight. Han and Leia may live forever on screen, but for Harrison Ford, those 3 months remained a ghost that lingered long after the credits rolled.
By the early 2000s, after decades of failed marriages, rumors, and heartbreak, Harrison Ford wasn't exactly looking for love. He was in his 60s, carrying the bruises of 2 divorces, the grief of lost love, and the exhaustion of being a legend who could never escape his own shadow. But then, fate introduced him to someone completely unexpected, Calista Flockhart. It was 2002, at a Golden Globes party. She was the star of Ally McBeal, known for her sharp wit and delicate presence. He was the grizzled Hollywood veteran, already cemented as an icon. On paper, it didn't make sense. She was 22 years younger, living in a completely different Hollywood. But when their eyes met, there was no pretense, no performance, no act. Harrison later admitted it wasn't her fame that drew him in. It was her kindness, her warmth, the way she made the noise of Hollywood fade into the background. For a man who had spent decades being claimed by the world, Calista gave him something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Their love grew quietly, away from cameras, away from scandal, and this time Ford wasn't rushing. He was old enough to know the difference between passion's blaze and love's endurance. With Calista, it was endurance. Unlike his earlier marriages, they didn't have children together, but family came in a different form. Calista had adopted a son, Liam, before meeting Ford, and Harrison, despite all the scars of complicated fatherhood, embraced him as his own. Devotion, not biology, made them a family. Friends noticed how much softer Ford became, how the restless edges of his personality finally seemed to ease. For once, he wasn't just surviving love, he was living it. In 2010, after 8 years together, they married in a small, private ceremony in New Mexico. No red carpets, no magazine spreads, no spectacle. Just 2 people choosing each other. Soon after, they settled into a ranch in Wyoming, far from Hollywood chaos. Days on horseback, evenings by the fire, Liam's laughter echoing through open fields. For the first time in his life, Ford wasn't chasing adventure. He was living in its quiet aftermath. And when tragedy struck again, Callista proved she wasn't just another chapter, she was his anchor. In 2015, when Harrison's vintage plane crashed onto a golf course in Los Angeles, the world panicked. Headlines screamed about the death of a legend. Callista simply stayed by his side. Later, when asked how she handled it, her answer was just 3 words: "I love him." That, more than any box office number or critical review, was the essence of this chapter. For decades, Harrison Ford had played heroes who survived everything. With Callista, he finally found a partner who made survival worth it.
For decades, Harrison Ford built his reputation on toughness. He wasn't the kind of actor who let stunt doubles do the dirty work. If Indiana Jones was hanging off a truck or leaping across rooftops, Ford wanted it to be him. Authenticity was his creed, and fans loved him for it. But flesh isn't celluloid, and eventually, even the toughest bodies start to break. The first cracks came quietly: torn ligaments, busted bones, aches that never healed properly. By the time he hit his 70s, every step carried the weight of decades of punishing stunts. Still, Ford pressed on. He shrugged off the pain with gruff humor, insisting, "If the audience is gonna believe it, it has to be me." Then, in June 2014, came the wake-up call no one could ignore. On the set of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, inside the Millennium Falcon itself, a malfunctioning hydraulic door came crashing down on him. It shattered his leg, pinning him beneath the very ship that had made him a legend. Production halted. Cast and crew watched in stunned silence as Han Solo himself lay broken on the floor. Barely a year later, it happened again, but this time it wasn't a movie set. It was real life. In March 2015, while flying one of his beloved vintage planes, the engine failed. The aircraft plummeted out of the sky and smashed into a golf course in Los Angeles. The wreckage looked fatal. For long, breathless minutes, the world thought the indestructible Harrison Ford was gone. He survived, but survival came with shadows. In interviews afterward, Ford joked about it, even reenacting the accident with toy models on late-night TV. But those close to him saw the shift, the wariness in his eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that he wasn't unbreakable anymore. And time kept pressing his case. In 2021, at nearly 80 years old, Ford tore his shoulder rehearsing a fight scene for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Production halted for weeks while he recovered from surgery. The irony was cruel. The eternal adventurer, once outrunning boulders and villains, was now being undone by his own body. By the time Indy 5 premiered at Cannes in 2023, fans knew what they were really watching. Not just another movie, but a farewell. The applause that thundered through the theater wasn't just for the film. It was for the man himself. Older, slower, scarred, but still standing. And maybe that's the point. Harrison Ford didn't cheat time. He didn't stay indestructible forever. What makes his story so powerful is that he kept getting up again and again, even as his body betrayed him. That, in the end, is a different kind of immortality.
Today, Harrison Ford sits at 83 years old, surrounded by wealth and recognition most people can't even imagine. His net worth soars past $300 million. His homes stretch from Manhattan penthouses to his sprawling Wyoming ranch, and his hangars are filled with vintage planes worth more than some people earn in a lifetime. From a broke carpenter building cabinets just to survive, he built an empire of his own. But here's the irony. The man who once commanded galaxies now lives smaller, quieter, and more withdrawn than ever. On his Wyoming ranch, half of which he donated to conservation, Ford chooses stillness over spectacle. No flashing cameras, no blockbuster chaos, just mornings on horseback, evenings by the fire, and the comfort of being present with Callista and their son Liam. For a man who once seemed indestructible, the truth is visible now. The leg still aches from the Millennium Falcon accident. The shoulder stiffens from his final indie film, and every step carries the echoes of decades of stunts. Even Ford admits it, with a grin. It beats the alternative. But his friends see the toll. The pauses, the slowness, the body whispering what the myth refused to admit. Even heroes grow old. And yet, this Twilight chapter isn't just about loss, because Ford hasn't retreated into self-pity. Instead, he's poured himself into causes bigger than himself. As vice chair of Conservation International, he's fought for rainforests, rivers, and endangered species with the same stubbornness he once brought to movie sets. He's flown rescue missions, saved lost hikers with his helicopter, and lent his voice to environmental campaigns long before activism was fashionable. In many ways, this is his truest role. Not Han Solo, not Indiana Jones, not the president kicking terrorists off planes, but the man who used his wealth and fame to protect something that will last long after he's gone. And yet, behind all that, the shadows remain. He has outlived loves that shaped him. Mary, who carried him through obscurity, lost to divorce. Melissa, who stood beside him in triumph, lost to illness. Carrie, the secret flame, gone too soon. Even with Callista's quiet devotion, Ford carries the weight of absence, the kind of silence that no fortune can erase. So what is his legacy? Maybe it isn't just the whip cracks or box office records. Maybe it's endurance, the ability to rise again after rejection, after heartbreak, after broken bones and near-death crashes. Harrison Ford's story isn't just about being a Hollywood legend. It's about being human, fragile, scarred, but unbowed. Because the truth is, what makes him unforgettable isn't that he seemed indestructible. It's that he kept going long after indestructibility was gone. Now I want to hear from you. At more than 80 years old, Harrison Ford has lived through triumphs, heartbreaks, crashes, and recoveries. What has he left in your heart? Do you remember him most as Han Solo, Indiana Jones, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments so we can honor this legend together. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, not just for the legend, but for the lessons his life still carries.